Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for Creative Work in the Age of AI, Tools, Practice, and the Road Ahead. It's part of the CoSTAR Network's AI for Creativity program. My name is Simeon Ellerton-Kay. I'm a research fellow at Goldsmiths and part of the CoSTAR Foresight Lab, and I'll be hosting today. We've got a really strong set of perspectives across policy, industry, and research, so we're looking forward to a rich discussion. There will be a chance to tell us what you're learning, as well as to ask questions. So do use the Q&A function in Teams throughout, and we'll come to the Q&A at the end. But before we get into the detail of the session, I'm just going to introduce the director of the CoSTAR Foresight Lab, Johnny Freeman, to say a brief welcome and hello.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Simeon, and welcome everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to have so many of you join us for this CoSTAR Foresight Lab workshop webinar on AI for creativity. And it's a real pleasure to actually thank our colleagues, Simeon, David, Vicky, who pulled this together, and our guest speakers. It's really timely to have this session because AI, as we all know, is completely reshaping the creative industries. We're in a moment of radical change, and our role as Foresight Lab is to help connect industry, insight and policy in the face of this rapid technological change. The webinar is part of the AI for Creativity season that the CoSTAR network as a whole is running, along with our brilliant colleagues at National Lab, Live Lab, Real Time Lab, and Screen Lab. And it's really focused on supporting responsible adoption of AI. What that means to us is keeping human creativity, IP, and ethics at the center of our focus as we promote the adoption and use of AI ethically across convergent media production. The goal of all of this is to build capability across the UK sector, and this session brings key perspectives together, and I'm really looking forward to enjoying it. I hope you are too. That's all I have to say other than welcome and enjoy the afternoon. Thank you. Simeon, back to you.
Thank you, Johnny. Thanks for dropping in to say hello. That's our welcome, and I'm just going to do a brief further introduction. This is our agenda for today. We've, as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and we'll share a feedback form afterwards. Today, what we'll actually be covering is we'll move from policy to industry insight and into future directions and question and answer. So you should have a really broad range of perspectives and thought-provoking content. We've already mentioned that this session is being run by the CoSTAR Foresight Lab. The CoSTAR Network is a network of creative industries research and innovation funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, part of UKRI. And it's focused on advancing the UK's world-leading position in games, film, TV, and live performance. And really, it's providing research, development, and innovation and business support. There are 5 labs that Johnny mentioned previously in the CoSTAR network, and we are one of those labs. The other labs are the National Lab, which focuses on advanced R&D, Screen Lab, Live Lab, and Real Time Lab, each focused on their screen, live performance, and gaming, respectively. All the labs are collaborative partnerships, especially the Foresight Lab, and 3 of the 4 partners are going to be presenting today. So that's myself from Goldsmiths, David from BFI, and Vicky from Loughborough, alongside our special guest speakers, which I'm sure you're all really keen to hear from. Our guest speakers are, on the policy side, we have Sally Davies, who's Managing Director of Abbey Road Studios and AI Champion for the creative industries. And in the case studies session, we'll have Susan Cummings, CEO of 10-6 Games, and Christine Hartland, CEO of My Smash Media. Each brings a different perspective on how AI is being applied in practice, so I'm sure we'll really enjoy that. Before we move on, I just want to briefly frame the lens we're using today. At the Foresight Lab, we tend to think in 2 modes. So there's the insight mode, and that's really about what's happening now. Where is adoption taking place? Where's it landing? Where isn't it landing? And then the foresight lens, which is more about what's emerging, and in particular, how we make sense of uncertainty, the kind of big systemic and structural changes. Importantly, this isn't abstract. It's really grounded in sector practice and in policy development. And of course, in these conversations that we have with people like you and like our special guests today. So we also want this to be participatory, and throughout the session, we're inviting you to contribute something we call the signal station. A signal is simply something you've spotted that suggests change is happening. That could be technologically, that could be culturally, or it could be structurally. So this might be a new tool, a shift in business models, a change in audience behavior, or something that just feels like things are moving, changing, or progressing. You can submit these signals via the QR code. And we're especially interested, as I say, in these 3 areas. So you can choose a theme. Is it mostly about technological or technical innovation? Is it more about the systems and structures within which we're operating? Or is it about the kind of creativity and culture, kind of the people and the actual creative output? But don't worry too much about those categories. Just choose whichever feels closest. It's more important that you tell us what you're seeing on the ground. Drop in as many as you like throughout the session, and we'll come back to these at the end and see what's there if we have time and if we have enough patterns and signals in there. Please also, as I said, put your direct questions in the Q&A on Teams, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. So yeah, we'll have quite a lot of discussion, Q&A, and opportunity to see what you're saying later on. Hopefully you've had time to quickly scan that QR code. We'll drop something into the chat as well, and we'll keep reminding you throughout. So with that framing in place, we're going to move into the first section on policy. So I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Vicky Williams from Loughborough University, and Sally Davies.
Hello, stellar timekeeping there, Simeon. I think I'm on your screens now. So hello, everybody. It's fantastic to have you this afternoon and for being with us despite the crazy temperatures outside. So thank you so much. So we're kicking off today with a bit of a 101 on the policy landscape. My name is Vicky Williams. As Simeon said, I'm the Policy and Partnerships Manager for the CoSTAR Foresight Lab based out of Loughborough University, London. And I'm delighted to be joined by Sally Davies, who I will introduce momentarily to speak about not only her role as Managing Director of Abbey Road Studios, but also her role in the recently published AI adoption plan for the sector. So in our work in policy research and engagement, Simeon has very brilliantly introduced our kind of insight and foresight lenses that we use across the work of the Foresight Lab. And this applies to the work we do in policy as well. The creative technology policy landscape is hugely complex, and whilst we can track the insight and see what's happening across the piece, thank you, Simeon, there are a lot of unknowns, ambiguities and uncertainties that play a role in navigating what's happening both in policy and practice, and we'll be digging into some of that today. But our role very much within Foresight Lab, as Johnny prefaced, is to really track and navigate that policy evolution over time, both getting a sense of the direction of travel, but where things are likely headed into the future. And AI, of course, has been central to our policy work, not only because of its centrality to the government's industrial strategy, but because of the real impacts and significance for the creative industries, which is the sector that we work within. So within 5 minutes, I'm going to hopefully give a very, very top level whistle stop tour of some of the policy landscape developments over the last 18 to 24 months, and really sort of give a sense of where we're seeing things evolve. So this webinar is all about reshaping AI development, use and practice. And we have very much positioned creators and the creative industries as being really central to also reshaping policy and regulation as well. This has been central to a number of responses we've submitted to government, whether that's to the industrial strategy launched in 2024, through to things like the AI and copyright consultation, and really ensuring that things like responsible adoption, IP, ethics and remuneration are central to those developments. So this timeline here is by no means all encompassing, but what we began to kind of see with the new government and the launch of the industrial strategy in 24 was a real sense of prominence of AI and technology innovation in the government's agenda. And since then, a number of different things have launched, from the significant sort of AI adoption, AI Opportunities Action Plan, big investments in regional AI growth zones, and the inclusion of AI in local growth zone and growth plans as well. So what we've been doing kind of behind the scenes is tracking, undertaking research, both domestically and overseas, to really get a sense of what's being implemented both here and internationally. So you can see a couple of those screenshotted there. And it's worth noting that an updated literature review on AI and copyright will be published in the coming weeks. I believe our insights pages will be shared with you in the chat, so you can, any of the publications and resources that we referenced today, you can access there. But Simeon, if I can go on to the next slide, we've seen sort of an emergent splash of AI opportunities, but since then there's been really sort of more focused developments that respond to particular areas of opportunity and challenge. This has seen, again, increased investment in things like sovereign AI capability and investment in cross-economy AI skills. And so across the board, we have been promoting a kind of creative-led approach to technology and AI innovation. A lot of our work explores different incremental changes in signal areas that we're seeing. So particularly around sustainability and aligning sustainability policy with AI as well. And I'll come back to that. But a lot of what we've been doing is engaging with stakeholders, working in policy across the UK and the creative industries to really get a sense of not only the kind of priorities on the ground right now, but what we see will be impactful in the long term when it comes to policy evolution as well. And some of those areas are in the coloured text sort of going forward towards the future. But what we're really seeing is that there's an increased recognition that the creative industries are central to technology innovation and ensuring that, as I said, that the creative industries are really central to the shape and development of AI tools. And we'll hear about some of that in our case study section coming up. There's been an increased recognition of AI literacy and skills. This is across both education and lifelong learning. Again, the recognition of trust and safety and the role that that plays in boosting AI adoption, particularly in our sector, and making sure that the tools not only sort of serve, but are built in a way that fosters trust and transparency. Data ownership, again, we will come back to this later in some of our foresight work, but a huge range of initiatives to support data ownership initiatives, including the kind of piloting of the Creative Content Exchange. And finally, regional devolution is continuing to kind of shape investments in AI across the country to make sure that the benefits are not only in one particular place, but are fostering opportunities across the country. Sustainability is one more emergent area that I think we're beginning to see and hear from stakeholders is going to be increasingly important, ensuring that we are aligning policy and regulation around sustainability with the development of different AI data centres and growth zones as well. So we will be continuing to track these developments over time. That's a very whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it gives a sense of kind of where we're seeing things evolve and emerge. And part of that has been the recently published AI adoption plan for creative industries. And next slide, please, Simeon. And with that in mind, I am absolutely delighted that Sally Davies, who is the government's appointed AI champion for the creative industries, has been able to join us today. So I'm delighted to hand over to Sally to talk a little bit more about her role at Abbey Road and the work she's been doing behind the scenes on AI adoption. So over to you, Sally.
Super. Thank you so much, Vicky. I just noted I was slightly overzealous turning my camera on, so apologise for sharing the podium with you rather unexpectedly. Good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Sally Davies. I have the pleasure of being the Managing Director of Abbey Road Studios. What I'd like to do this afternoon is briefly introduce myself, talk a little bit about Abbey Road and why we've agree to take on the role as AI champion and perhaps touch on some of the salient points of the paper. So what I won't do is I won't go through the paper in detail because you can easily access that online, but I can certainly share some of my thinking whilst I was writing the paper and really what sits at the heart of it. But first of all, I think all of you will know the musical history of Abbey Road. We are the first purpose-built recording studio in the world, and we are probably the most iconic recording studio in the world. We opened in 1931, and prior to us opening in 1931, the process of recording was done by a method of engineers going out to artists' homes or conferencing facilities or hotels and recording artists in those environments. And obviously those environments presented issues because the acoustics were somewhat rubbish. They weren't consistent until someone at EMI thought, you know, let's create a very specific space that we bring artists to and record them in an environment that is conducive for that. So that is the genesis of recording studios. But what people don't realize about Abbey Road is our history is not only steeped in music from the Beatles and Pink Floyd, but we have been very much at the forefront of innovation and technology. So a vast array of processes have been invented by us. So for instance, stereo sound was invented in our home by one of our engineers called Alan Blumlein, and that process used to be called binaural audio. We also invented a really brilliant process called artificial double tracking, and we invented that because apparently John Lennon didn't like the sound of his voice and didn't actually like to re-sing several parts over and over again. So we developed a technique that we could layer his voice up very efficiently. So with processes like stereo sound, artificial double tracking, and a vast array of other techniques, we have shaped the way that audio is captured and recorded today to such an extent that the way that you listen to music has been influenced by some of those innovations. We've carried on our innovation in the space through the work that we do in making audio hardware. We also make audio software. So we make plugins, we make loops and sample packs. We also have a brilliant technology which is called Audio Movers, and that is like the Zoom of studios. So you can be a producer in LA, you can be a vocalist in Ulaanbaatar, you can be a drummer in Paris, and we can work with you remotely at the highest quality. So we're very much still in that innovation lane. We also have a music tech incubator, which was Europe's first, and we're incubating a range of different companies coming through. So we've been quite close to the AI conversation for the last 10 years. So that sort of leads me on to very naturally when we were approached by DCMS to take on the baton as AI champion for the sector, it felt like we could do something really meaningful in the space. So obviously beyond the work that we do in music, we also do a lot in film scoring. So 6 or 7 out of every 10 Hollywood blockbusters are scored in studio with us. You know, whether it was Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars and Harry Potter, one of the Marvel titles, more recently Oppenheimer, parts of Wicked and Barbie, One Battle of Another. All of those big Hollywood projects are scored here in our home. We are also very much in the space that is game scoring, podcasting, music, obviously. And over the last 4 to 5 years, we have really lent into music photography through our Music Photography Accelerator. And now starting to diversify them further into other creative lanes, such as fashion. So the reason I say this is that all of those creative disciplines converge here at Abbey Road. So we have a front row seat to how those creative workflows are changing as a consequence of AI. And we are close, we are at the coalface. So I think it puts us in a really nice position to champion dialogue, champion conversation. How do we get to a place that we can have this conversation with a degree of pragmatism? Because I think the consultation process last year was a difficult one. So that leads me on to briefly talk about the paper. When I set out to write the paper, I really wasn't writing a paper about artificial intelligence. What I was hoping to do was really write about the future of creativity. And I wanted to answer a specific question, which is, how do we ensure that the UK's greatest strength remains globally competitive in an age of AI? So today, the creative industries contributes 146 billion to the UK economy. It accounts for 6% of the UK's GVA and 13% of the UK's exports. And the statistic that's rather mind-blowing is we are the third largest creative economy in the world. So a population of circa 70 million, and we are the third largest. So this isn't a niche conversation. It's an economic conversation, it's a cultural conversation, and increasingly it is a strategic conversation. So there are three core principles that sit at the heart of the adoption paper, and I'll briefly touch on those. The first one is AI is already here. The second one is it is an augmentation first approach. And then the third one is that the UK has the opportunity to lead the world in trusted creative AI. So let me start with the first one, which is AI is already here. You know, this is not a conversation which is about what is inherently good AI and what is inherently bad AI. It's really about what does adoption look like today? Where is the sector in terms of adoption? What are the challenges? What do responsible frameworks look like? Another rather impressive stat which surfaced during my work on the paper was that 51% of creative businesses are already using AI. I mean, that is a number that is far greater than I thought it would be, especially when the wider economy's adoption is at 33%. So we are well ahead of others in the conversation on adoption. And although reports are saying 51%, my hunch here is adoption is probably a little bit more than 51%, because there are a lot of creatives and creators working with AI behind closed doors and perhaps not admitting to using AI because of the stigma of, does it make me less of a creative if I'm using AI? Is it deemed as cheating? So my hunch is it probably is a little bit more than 51%. So the question isn't about whether AI is coming, it's already here. And the real question is, how do we shape adoption? Now, having spoken to a number of people in the sector, from freelancers to creators to studio leaders to entrepreneurs, there is one common theme that kept on emerging. People are curious. People are experimenting. People are very cautious. There are real questions around copyright and real concerns around copyright. There are real questions and concerns around trust. And there are concerns around jobs, skills, the future of creative careers. And all of those concerns deserve to be taken seriously. So although my approach is one of pragmatism, I'm not saying that we should push aside those core issues. I'm saying we need to deal with those. We need to tackle those. They are fundamental to the conversation of value. But at the same time, let us parallel process an approach that is pragmatic around how we shape adoption. The second idea behind the paper is augmentation, not replacement. So for me, this is a real central principle of the paper. The value of the creative industries comes from the people. It comes from imagination, it comes from judgment, originality, taste, storytelling, and technology should not remove the human process at the heart of it, but technology should help us do more of those things, not less. Throughout the research, there were quite a lot of examples of businesses using AI to remove repetitive work, to streamline workflows and improve productivity. But they had one thing in common. All of those examples that I came across had human creativity at the center. So AI was supporting creative work, not replacing it. And that's why I described the approach in the paper as being an augmentation first, because I believe that AI should give creative people more time to be creative, more time for ideas, more time for experimentation, more time for craft, and less time spent on repetitive administrative tasks. And the third and final idea in the paper is one about opportunity. So whilst much of the public conversation is around risks, I think we need to recognise that opportunity is in front of us. The UK is a global creative powerhouse. Going back to that stat, we're the third largest creative economy in the world. We have world-leading talent. We have world-leading institutions. We have a long history of combining creativity and technology. And there's an opportunity to become a global home of trusted creative AI. It's not just about adopting technology faster. I think it's about showing how innovation, creativity, and trust can all work together. But that means we've got to support the creators, we've got to support the freelancers, the small businesses, we've got to build skills, we've got to develop clear standards, and we've got to address the questions around rights and transparency. And we've also got to make sure that AI is available across the sector, not just to the large organizations. So the paper isn't about technology for technology's sake. It's about ensuring that creativity remains at the heart of our future. This isn't a choice about creativity or AI. This is really about how AI can strengthen creativity. And my hope is that this paper starts that conversation. And alongside the paper, there are a number of engagement initiatives that I'm running, a series of AI salons that I'm hosting in Abbey Road to bring different parts of the creative industry together to talk very pragmatically about what's working, what's not working, what do we need government to do more of on the topic of adoption, as well as I'm about to release a series of mini documentaries looking at how various creatives are using AI in their workflows. So you can expect to see that being released towards the back end of the year. So with that, I wrap up what I want to talk to you about this afternoon, and I can only apologize that I can't stay on and take questions. But if there are questions from the audience, and if you do want to engage, interact, have a conversation with me, share your perspective, Vicky will be able to share the best contact details to get in touch. And I would really love to hear from various pockets of the creative industries, because I want to make sure this is not just a music conversation. We need to embrace all of the breadth of different disciplines that sit under that umbrella. So with that, Vicky, I'm going to hand back to you or Simeon, and thank you very much for having me this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Sally. That was incredibly important, and I think seeing the UK as a leader in trusted creative AI is certainly an ambition that CoSTAR shares. So thank you so much for your time. And as Sally mentioned, we will be following up after the call with ways to engage and follow up with Sally, and I'll be fielding any questions later in the webinar as well. So thank you so much, Sally, for your time. And Simeon, I will hand back over to you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I'm just going to remove Sally from the... Oh, there we go. Thank you. Just a minor technical issue there. So yeah, thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Sally. Yeah, it was really exciting to hear Sally talk about convergence there, because obviously that's really at the core of what CoSTAR Network is really about, and the way that technology is driving convergence in the creative industries. But also just personally, as someone who studied and had an early career as a musician, hearing from Abbey Road and to hear so eloquently about that history of technological innovation and kind of tying AI as one form of current technological innovation into the history of how technologies have changed and opened up opportunities and risks for the sectors in the creative industries over the many years. So yeah, thank you. But I won't spend time telling you what I think, because it's really about our guests and our colleagues. So I just want to move now from this kind of policy and structural level view onto the kind of industry insight and case studies, focusing on how this actually plays out in practice. So I'll be handing over to my colleague David Johnson from the BFI, along with Susan Cummings and Christine Hartland.
Thanks, Simeon. Hello, everyone. I'm David from the British Film Institute. I'm the Creative Technology Industry Manager here at the CoSTAR Foresight Lab. At the BFI, we've been working with practitioners, companies and trade bodies to track and explore usage of AI in the creative industries, much as Sally was saying, as part of work supporting the broader sector. Next slide, please, Simeon. So in June 2025, as part of our CoSTAR work, we published the report AI in the Screen Sector, focused specifically on AI use in film, high-end TV and video games, creating consultation and featuring case studies from industry. It explores the state of usage and applications as of summer 2025 and the barriers and challenges to adoption, risks and opportunities. And the overall findings, although they're 12 months old, still feel really relevant today from what we're hearing, despite the technology and the policy landscape changing. The technology particularly advancing really rapidly, the policy landscape perhaps less so. Broadly, we see AI being embedded into VFX workflows, while generative AI is being explored for specific applications like planning, previs, ideation, software development support, and general post-production. Whilst the output of these models and these technologies is improving rapidly, there's really large challenges that still persist around strategy, scaling, IP, and skills, as we've already heard. The report proposed a roadmap of recommendations in 3 broad areas. So frameworks encompassing rights, carbon, and responsible application of AI, targeted support, looking at creating insight, supporting skills development, and increasing the public understanding of AI use in screen content. And finally, growth, economic growth, things around sector adaptation routes, investment possibilities and ways to empower creators and producers, particularly independent ones. Next slide, please, Min. So following on from the report, our team have been collating key news stories and developments across the technology, sectoral and policy landscape and providing insight and narrative around them in the form of the AI digest you can see here. The digest publishes quarterly and initially has been focused on the screen sector, but we're now expanding that to the wider creative industries, reflecting the thing we've heard about already, the inevitable convergence of technologies and practice, particularly with new technologies that don't have kind of established workflows and practice. Next slide, please. Thank you. Again, after the reception of the report, we've been creating a wider body of evidence in the Casebook, specific case studies, talking to companies who are using generative and emerging learning and AI techniques, tools and platforms in their own products and services, right across the value and production chain in the creative industries. The aim of this work is, again, to surface some of the invisible work being referenced in the report to show policymakers, producers and companies what's happening in the UK system and what's possible with this technology now and in the future. Like I say, we're looking to expand the remit of this across the broader creative industries to include applications in music and live performance, advertising, marketing and fashion. Because, as Sally said, these technologies all converge and applications, although maybe developed specifically for graphic design or film production, can be applied in things like fashion and live performance. And so, without further ado, you don't need to hear too much more from me. I'm delighted to introduce the first of our case studies today, Susan Cummings. So Susan is the co-founder and CEO of 106 Games, a Wales-based developer and publisher. A veteran of the games industry, she previously co-founded both 2K Games, home to Bioshock, which is a personal favourite of mine, Borderlands and Civilizations, and currently runs Tiny Rebel Games, the celebrated studio behind Doctor Who Legacy and Wallace and Gromit, the big fix-up. Susan, take it away.
Thank you. Just if you could tell me for sure that you can hear me and see this, because I'm on one screen.
We can hear you just fine.
Awesome. Fantastic. I'm usually on 2 monitors. Thank you. Yes, I'm Susan Cummings. I've run a company called 106 Games. I've been in video games for about 30 years now. So I've watched lots of transitions happen over that time. And the game industry, despite being a technology industry, has a sort of history of being hesitant about new technologies. And so generative AI is another example of that. So it's a weird time in our industry where there's a lot of job concern, for example, which is completely well-founded. But unfortunately, it seems to be handcuffing us a bit about looking for innovation. So my team is 8 people. We're like a little rock band. We came together nearly 2 years ago to figure out if there were some novel, fun use cases for generative AI. We know it can be used for productivity and for efficiency and to avoid the mind-numbing tasks that we don't want to do. But we were looking for something deeper than that. We wanted to figure out, were there things that LLMs could allow us to do that we couldn't do without them? And where is the fun? And what's possible that wouldn't be possible otherwise? And so what we realized very quickly is that LLMs can allow you to be you in a meaningful way in a video game. So by that I mean, I don't look like Lara Croft. Don't want to look like Lara Croft. For 30 years now, women have had their chests hanging out in video games. We don't have to do that anymore. So think about this from a diversity and representation standpoint, that you can be you in a video game. You could be a kid in a village in Asia that with a birthmark on your face, in a village I don't know, with a bully for a neighbor. That can immediately be part of your gameplay experience. And so what we've done with You versus Zombies, which is our first game, is we've been building a game that allows us to showcase this fun. So it's a time traveling roguelike game in which you can literally be anybody. The idea is that it is the end of days. There are 3 survivors, Morgan, Ash, and you. And the idea is that the zombies have won, unfortunately. And your last ditch plan is to cast a spell that allows you to go back in time like Sam Bakula in Quantum Leap and kill zombies. Kill enough zombies, we might change the timeline. So that's the framing for this. It's a Quantum Leap sort of story in which you can literally be anybody. So how that works is we do something that we call the ritual. You're going to tell Morgan and Ash who you want to be. Now, the important thing to understand is that all of the systems in this game were built by us. So we have an amazing artist on team who designed our art style and trained custom Lauras with our platform engineer. We have a number of programmers on our team who work in very traditional ways to build a game. We have designers on our team who have defined the design of the game and the systems of the game. Because what we found out is that AI needs to work within very tight constraints. We need to design the spell systems. We give it very specific opportunities to change things. Jack Buser from Google, we're very close with the Google Gemini team, said recently that AI is like the Iron Man suit. And I thought that that was a wonderfully elegant way of explaining it. We don't want the AI to define the creativity. We don't think AI knows what fun is, but we think it's really interesting to be able to empower a user to do things in runtime. And this is what we call hyper-personalization. And our small team in Wales is essentially on the cutting edge of this. What we're going to deliver is the first time this can be used at runtime. So if you go into our game right now, which is a live demo, you can personalize it in seconds. And we use a whole slew of technologies to do that. So we built a platform, and that platform uses Gemini heavily, but it also uses technology like 11 Labs for voice narration. We use Flux Klein on the art side. We use Lyria Pro's API on the music side. And essentially what happens is you tell us who you want to be, and the experience gets customized in runtime. So who you are, who your boss fight is, the names of your spells, even the colors of those spells, the story gets written in runtime as you play, and then everything is shareable in the end. So again, what's important to understand there is that none of that got built by AI. We've trained the AI in our system so that you, when you're a user, come in and say, this is who I am. All those systems can immediately adapt in runtime in about 12 to 15 seconds. And that's something you simply couldn't do without LLMs. And we think that that's profoundly important. So that's been our focus. We are going to be launching the game towards the end of the year. And you can play it now on Steam. Like I said, there's a demo live on Steam. And yeah, we're looking for feedback, and we want to hear if people think that this is a really sort of fun, interesting use case for AI.
Thank you very much, Susan. That's really interesting. And I love how much you're leaning into exploring new forms of personalization and fun with this title. I hope it comes to Switch as well, because I don't have Steam. I don't.
It will. We're going to come to console.
Thumbs up. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Of course.
That was super interesting. Thank you. So up next, we have Christine Hartland and Mahesh Ramachandra from Smash Media. Christine is co-founder and CEO of My Smash Media, an IP matchmaking platform for the creative industries, which she set up with fellow actor producer Fiona Gillies and product expert Mahesh Ramachandra. Mahesh is a digital product expert with 25 years of experience across B2B SaaS and B2C entertainment, specializing in early stage product development, team building, and scaling the product market fit. He's held CPO and director roles at companies including Next, E1 at Hasbro, Kids Know Best, Azumi, and Hopster. Christine and Mahesh, over to you.
Thank you. Just going to share my screen. There we go. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. So I'm Christine, one of the co-founders of My Smash Media, as you mentioned, along with Fiona and Mahesh is with me. He's a digital product expert with experience across interactive TV, kids product and video games. And Fiona and I are film producers. Fiona and I did not intend to be in disruptive tech, but find ourselves uniquely positioned to solve long-standing problems in the creative industries. Those problems we've experienced firsthand. So, as you know, all the UK government modern industrial strategy places creative industries at the heart of its long-term growth plan. Here in the UK, we're good, actually excellent at creating intellectual properties, but not always good at getting it to the right people. Discovery is still mostly done manually through networks, relationships, and inboxes. The industry match rate, i.e. how often a submitted project actually fits what an industry decision maker needs, sits around 2%. That means sifting through 100 projects to find 2 that work, if you're lucky. For overstretched development teams, that's not sustainable. On the other side, talented creators outside the traditional network, and often the most original voices, simply don't get seen. Smash is an IP matchmaking marketplace. Think of it as a dating app for creative projects. We started building the Smash platform thanks to a mix of 2 Innovate UK grant and the Scottish Enterprise R&D grant with angel investment. Smash connects creators, for example, writers, directors, producers, with projects, with industry decision makers who we call discoverers. Discoverers are producers, production companies, studio, broadcasters, financiers, sales agents, and service providers who are looking for projects beyond their existing network. Our goal at Smash is simple. Get the right projects in front of the right people efficiently and safely. We are an extra tool, not a replacement for relationships, judgment, and taste that drives this industry. So how does Smash work? Discoverers work with our Smash Cupid team to build a call out, which is a structured brief based on what they're actually looking for. That call out goes out via our network and socials. The Smash Cupid team, then supported by our agentic AI matchmaking tool, filters and curates all the submissions. And we give the discoverers a slate of projects that fit their brief but come from beyond their usual commissioning circle. AI does the heavy lifting. Our Smash Cupid team makes the final call. Here is how it works for creators. Smash gives every creator a free industry standard pitch builder with IP protection. Creators can share their pitch to anyone via a URL link, publish it on the Smash marketplace, and or submit it directly to callouts. And now I'm going to hand over to Mahesh.
Hi, everybody. So, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different tools that we've been creating over the, over the years. So, we started out by trying to address the most, most critical problem that new creators face, which is creating a great logline or synopsis for their wonderful project, which they don't really want to compress down into only a few words. It's really the thing that discoverers focus on is the quality of the logline and that synopsis to help make a decision, sometimes even whether to read the actual script or not. So what happens is that our synopsis and our logline and synopsis tool help the creators create better projects. It's almost like a training system. And our synopsis tool in particular, it functions almost like a writing clinic that interrogates the writers and gets them to deeply and think deeply and analytically about their project. And that's where we started. And now, next slide, please. what we then came up with is our agentic tool, which is we call the Smash Cupid. Essentially, it's there to help the human Cupid who does our matchmaking. But what we do is that with this tool, which we created again with the support of the Scottish Enterprise R&D grant, we're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of projects, and we are seeing how they can possibly match up with the call outs that Christine mentioned earlier from our discoverers. And what our tool does is that it reads through every submission, scores and ranks them against that brief, and then flags, and this is the important bit, it first works with projects that don't exactly fit the brief, but that perhaps are close enough. And what it then does is that it then provides guidance and tips to nudge creators to kind of improve or tweak their project before resubmitting again. And then when projects sort of like do fall within the radar of like being a good match, it then goes in a very neatly to our human Cupid, who can then make a decision about whether to bring this up to the discoverer. So the result is that this allows us to really, it's a question of scale, to really scale the capabilities of one human being now has essentially the superpowers of like 10 agents. And as we go global, this becomes far more scalable than doing it by hand. So we ran a trial of this already with a global streamer, and it was hugely successful. We had 3 of our Smash creators are now in one-to-one conversations with that commissioner, and then these are not creators who would have been in that room otherwise. So the potential is enormous for how we use this with different types of discoverers. So, having said all that, there are lots of challenges with using these types of tools, right? And I think this is the same for a lot of companies trying to use AI within the creative industries. The first is just getting creators to think of AI as being another tool in their toolkit, rather than being something that they need to be fearful of, or to reject, or to even feel ashamed about using. They don't need to do that. Ultimately, AI is a tool that we as creators should harness and use it to actually improve or help us get to that next level. It's also difficult to explain to creators how their data is being used, right? Like when you provide your information to help shape a response to a query, the data is being used within that instance, but your data is not being used to actually train the underlying model. And that's not an easy thing to actually explain to anybody. And there are a lot of other nuances with data usage, sometimes not exactly helped by the AI companies themselves. So yeah, I'll just hand it back to Christine to talk a little bit more about the platform.
So Smash has over 9,000 users from over 100 countries, and we've recently completed our first bilingual call-out. And that 2% industry match rate, well, Smash raises it to 35%. Users are pushing us to expand into other creative verticals. For example, podcasts, books, theatre shows, and games are on our roadmap. Our next step is scaling our AI tools to serve those verticals as we grow. And we're encouraging users to think about the wider reach of their IP that they're creating. Winning a Gold Award for Tech Innovation at the Cannes Film Festival, Cannes Next, was a turning point for us. So we're building the framework for creative IP discovery. We've started with film and TV, but the framework works across every creative verticals. So AI in the creative industry usually means AI for content creation. That's not what we do, as you heard. We use AI behind the scene to make sure the right projects reach the right people. Open access, no gatekeeping. If there's one thing we wish we'd known earlier, we're not just building a product, we're changing behavior. and behavior change takes longer than technology. We're currently fundraising and welcome conversation with anyone who knows angel investors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine and Mahesh. I love how this project is about creating new opportunities, kind of traditional creative teams, and matching that kind of supply and demand across the creative industries. And you mentioned how you're kind of integrating AI and kind of data work as part of like a pipeline of this matchmaking service. And in the case studies, we've seen a lot of that, which is, you know, the application above and beyond just content creation, which is the thing we hear about a lot, but actually really isn't the kind of core of how it's being used across the UK ecosystem. They're both great, fascinating case studies, and more available on our Casebook website. So the link should be in the chat. We won't be taking direct questions for the guests right now, but please do post any questions to the Q&A function on Teams, and don't forget to check out the Signal Stations Padlet. I'll now hand over to Simeon to look at some of the future directions we've been exploring as a lab. Simeon.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. Speaking in our insight section, I found that very insightful. And I look forward to playing the games and exploring those platforms myself in the future. So as I said, as David just said, we're going to zoom out slightly now and think about where this all might be heading, not as predictions, but as tensions and directions we can start to navigate. So one of the central questions we keep coming up and coming back to is actually about who gets to own AI in the creative industries. And that plays out across a few key tensions, and we've thought about this as a kind of classic quadrant analysis. We put these, we kind of boiled this question down into two really important factors when we're thinking about ownership. And one is in terms of the actual application. How are the users of AI actually engaging with the tools? There are versions of AI now, and there are versions of AI in the future where the creatives and the users and our kind of colleagues in the creative industries are actually training the tools themselves. We've heard about LoRa models, we've heard about SLMs, we've had various ways that people are talking about kind of not just accepting the output, but actually being part of the training of that output. And that might even be through the sort of intermediaries like we just heard about in kind of a platform space just now. But yeah, the kind of extent to which producers engage in the actual training of that data or relying on off-the-shelf products is really important from our perspective. On the other side, we have the ownership question. And this is really about whether the ownership is very much still in the kind of platform dimension, the way that we've experienced social media, that we are kind of subject to multinational corporations, or whether we find ways to have grassroots, bottom up, and kind of more federated or open source opportunities to kind of use AI that will allow us to actually take control, to explore varied and creative directions, and to essentially create and capture the value ourselves, so that it's not kind of going off to either those multinationals or to other places. The kind of quadrant that I'm talking you through very briefly here is from a report called Introduction to Moments. As with all of the reports and publications we've been talking about, you can find these on the CoSTAR Network website under Insights or under the Foresight Lab tab of that website, and we will be sharing those details. I'd just like to highlight what actually happens when you think about the quadrants in different places. So we've created these 4 scenarios, and they're kind of like stories. And the point of these scenarios is to help you imagine and think about the future, and think about the sort of choices that you might want to make in terms of business decisions or creative decisions in order to work towards a positive future. So the kind of dystopian one, perhaps, is the IP fracking one, where data training purely capitalizes on corporate IP, and that could lead us to a total media commodification, a kind of pure pipeline of media. But I'm sure that's not what any of us are hoping for. And I think what's really nice about that is if we recognize that dystopia, we can think about some of these other routes, which are maybe less dystopian. You may or may not like other of them. Another kind of scenario is the auto pipeline scenario. Now, this is a very efficient way of imagining AI and machine learning. And this could be lead to a very abundant marketplace where there's lots of competition among corporate actors that offer a number of different tools. And so, yeah, that competition traditionally would lead to a kind of highly efficient market where there would be a lot of choice for the users of the AI. However, that may not lead to the breadth and depth of creativity and innovation and novelty, because I think the thing that we've heard a lot here is that nobody wants to be outsourcing the novelty. In fact, fundamentally, the AI is not actually built to produce creative novelty, because it can only create from what it already knows. The other side of that diagram, we have the data alchemy, and I think this one's quite fun and exciting because it's about thinking very much in the most distributed, least centralized way, thinking about the kind of alchemy that could arrive from a more punk approach to kind of getting into the grassroots, into the fundamentals of the AI. And I actually read about someone who used Age of Empires to basically produce a version of an LLM, or basically it does the fundamental basics of an LLM. And I think this kind of way of really taking that absurdity and being really creative with what AI does is a kind of fun way to consider our relationship with it. But it's also a very useful way to consider our relationship with it. And then finally, collective intelligence. We think this is the kind of potentially the most useful or utopian, however you want to look at it, way of thinking about AI. And we really see that this is starting to emerge with special interest networks actually reframing what it means. So creatives and producers are involved in creating and training specific tools that do specific jobs that augment, much as many of our kind of guest speakers have been saying today, augmenting what is kind of special and valuable and unique about creatives and our industry. So if you want to dive into them more and the implications, please do go and read the Introduction to Moments report or any of the other Foresight reports. Kind of now drawing, I guess, some of the threads together, we've been doing some work on what sort of signals are emerging, so what is happening in the sector, and bridging that with the kind of foresight lens that I was just describing to you to understand what R&D opportunities and emerging kind of companies or approaches are happening out there actually in the world. So we've grouped them the same way we've grouped the signal station. So the technological innovation is really about how technologies are reshaping creative practice. And I'm really excited by the shift towards small local AIs and models such as small language models rather than large language models. This is really about creative tools moving from hyperscale to kind of local and task-specific systems. So very much within the scenarios I was talking about on the previous slide. And it's worth noting that the National Lab has done some really interesting work here. If you visit the prototyping page on the CoSTAR National Lab's website, you'll be able to find out more about work they did to enable redressing an actor within a scene and to keep certain elements stable and to change other elements, which is obviously very important from a creative control perspective. We're also seeing the emergence of modular and parameterized creativity tools. So that's really about new interfaces. I think one of the strange things about AI is that the current focus on large language models means that we're often using text prompts when we might be musicians, we're visual artists. We need to think about the way that interfaces kind of can enable a more creative relationship with the tool, because then we can start to use it more like a tool rather than as something that constrains us because we're constrained by the language that we're using. From the final of the three that I'm kind of highlighting here is about AI native and converged or open pipelines. So this is really about that idea of the assisted workflows and how we're seeing that AI is really pushing that convergence that we had already seen in screen technologies, but and that Sally was talking about how fashion and film and music are really coming together. And I think I'd ask you to, again, think about if you're seeing any examples of these new tools or new companies that are really working in this kind of native and converged space, please do put them in our signal station. The next one is really about the systems design. We all work within systems, they constrain us and they enable us. So these structures and institutions around creativity, and that includes the kind of behaviors and norms, do impact on what we even consider viable, what we consider creative, how we run our processes. It's not just the technology. So the rise of alternative AI business models is, again, something that's really exciting, and moving away from the extractive platform economics. We're already seeing Comfy UI really kind of capture a lot of market. And I think this is a really good example of a tool to choose and use various open AI models. We're also seeing a push towards national and sovereign AI infrastructure. Vicky was obviously talking about some of the policy work in there, including growth zones. And I think that this is, a really important area of work and will open up opportunity. But I know that there are concerns in this area too, so we need to be mindful of that, and the work that we're doing is kind of very much mapping some of these changes and helping policymakers think through how best to maximize the opportunities and minimize the risks. And I think another question that's emerging in the kind of system space is skills, and how are we going to enable skills to be updated, not just in the education, but from a lifelong learning perspective. The final strand is about creativity and authorship, and the kind of how cultural value is actually evolving. So to enable that value to be kind of understood and captured, we need IP frameworks, and we really need to rethink questions of ownership, attribution, and remuneration. And this is an area we've been doing some work here, as well as the CoSTAR report Time to Act, which sets out some guidelines for ethical use of AI and the future of IP in this space. On the same kind of area, we're seeing a really growing demand for ethical AI standards and certification. And I think that there's an opportunity for kind of trust and transparency to become real market differentiators for AI tools. We are seeing this to some extent with things like Mistral, which is based in France, and obviously that links back to that kind of national and sovereign AI infrastructure as well. And then finally, a shift towards distributed and collective models of authorship. When we're collaborating with the technology in the way that we are now, which seems on the surface beyond a tool, it's asking us questions about what that means in terms of ownership, and but it really feels like just another step forward from the way that in maybe a film where there are many contributors to every single element of a particular shot, and that is just going to become more important as we think about how AI can be used to personalize and reformulate and reuse the underlying IP within content to provide lots of different experiences across lots of different platforms and across lots of different media. So that's really a whistle-stop tour and summary of some of the thinking that the Foresight Lab has been doing in that kind of futures in terms of emerging signals, scenarios, and opportunities space. As I say, please go and read the reports where there's an opportunity to actually dig into this in a lot more detail, and to think in a much more narrative and speculative way, rather than this slightly kind of constrained and structured way. But that's what we have time for here, so that's the structure we're working with. Okay, with just about 20 minutes to go, which seems pretty good, we are able to jump onto the Q&A section, and my colleague Brian from the British Film Institute is going to kind of help coordinate and chair this part of the section. So, oh, my chair just dropped. Thank you, Brian.
No worries, Simeon. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining and participating so far. So there's a couple of different ways that you could contribute to this session. There's the Padlet, and we've had some nice shares on there. We've had people sharing articles about AI being used to recreate crime scenes for a CBS docudrama series. We've had pieces around the history of slop So do check that out, do contribute, and keep that bookmarked and adding signals as they come up. On the Q&A front, we have had some questions specifically for our MySmash Media colleagues, if they're happy to take questions. We've had a question here about the question re Smash Media. It sounds like it works on the basis that creators have a clear and granular view of what they want. What level of detail is written into these call outs? Because the question asker's personal experience is that commissioners have a broad feel for what they want, but then they respond to ideas and then finesse them with the creators. So how can AI help perfect call out responses?
So what's interesting is that's exactly what we thought the industry wanted, but actually everyone wants something different. So we've had people who just are going, we just want a treatment, an outline, and then we'll further develop it. Others, they'll want a script really well developed. Other people will actually want a completed film or in post-production. So we've basically covering the whole of the journey from development, even pre-development. Some people are using it just to kind of jot some lines. And then the decision makers, everyone's coming on board at different stages. So that was very, very interesting for us, because originally, to be honest, we thought it'd be grassroots talent with commissioners. Two very easily identifiable groups of people. You can nearly count them. And actually, and it exploded writers, directors, producers at any stages, short films, features, TV series. We've got authors, we've got podcasters, we've got an immersive opera, and all at different stages. And then on the other side, we have people who are post houses with finance. We've got producers looking at different stages of a project. So it's been really, really interesting, and we're constantly learning from our users.
The interesting thing is that we also use AI to help with the actual call out creation as well. When a discoverer has let's say a vague idea of what they want, there's a certain genre, a certain location, and all of that. They speak to our to one of the people on our team. But we also use AI to help write out or help flesh out that particular call out, so that it tends to cover things that they may have left out or that they haven't thought of yet. So actually, AI also increases the quality of the call out in the first place, which definitely helps with the matching process as things progress.
Thank you both. Another question here, Simeon. This relates to our Foresight Scenarios work. Punk data alchemy sounds awesome. It does. Training is cost prohibitive for many creatives today. Do you see that changing? Do we see that changing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So large language models, I think it's unlikely, because although the cost of the underlying technology changes over time, that seems to be slower than the rate of growth in terms of scaling of the actual underlying models. However, there's a lot of work happening around alternative models, which have a very different kind of cost structure because their process is very different. So the simplest one is small language models, and models that are approaches that are basically fixing certain elements of a model. So we heard about LoRa's there, I think one of our colleagues mentioned. So that does allow you to massively reduce the cost of training, because you are taking a much smaller subset. So often this is because you want to kind of focus, it's less on the generation of an entire world, and it's more about the kind of fixing of a particular element. So you're trying to cycle through a character's clothing, or you're just looking at the background display. So I think there are real opportunities there. And also, one of the things about these world building and these physics approach models is that they have the kind of the knowledge of the world actually built into the system. So we've seen browsers be able to actually build working game prototypes from scratch. So I think it's heading in the right direction, but it is also one of the reasons why part of the CoSTAR network is providing quite a lot of compute power as well, so that people can come and access that, because it's not necessarily easy, either from a cost or from a kind of access and skills perspective. So everyone should keep their eyes open for those calls and get involved if they're interested.
Thank you, Simeon. We've had a question here from Sam Tulin. How valid is Adobe's approach to involving originators' content in its AI tools? Is it best practice or lip service? What do photographers and the like feel about it? Now, I don't know, Sam, you might want to add some clarification to that in the comment below your question. Is anybody on the panel for the quick?
I can take that. Yeah,
Yeah,
Sam,
go ahead,
like you say, if you can use the comment in the discussion within the Q&A function to add any color if you like. I assume Sam's referring to Adobe's Firefly and similar services where they have claimed that they've used licensed content, fully licensed content within their model, so no, unlicensed, illegal, or otherwise procured outside of commercial contracts that Adobe and their partners own with people who've made the content, so photographers, illustrators, etc. Is it best practice or lip service? I mean, I think that gets the core problem and challenge around some of those things, which is a lot of the models, as everybody is aware, a lot of the models that are in kind of production today have been trained on things that have variously been scraped or downloaded off the internet, right? That's kind of unavoidable. Everybody knows it. It's come out in case, case law. It's kind of verifiable through various types of red teaming that, there's book sets, there's film sets that have all been used in this training. And so what Adobe's trying to do is, mitigate any future risk of creating services and licensing and creating subscriptions for people. In terms of best practice, I mean, that is a legal and ethical issue that I don't feel equipped, at least to talk about in a professional setting. I have personal opinions, I'm sure we all do. I think we are seeing more companies try and achieve this because it sets them apart in the market from companies that don't even pay lip service, shall we say. What do photographers and the like feel about it? I can't speak for photographers. I'm sure some of them are upset that they didn't fully read the T's and C's and didn't expect Adobe to do this. And some of them are probably less worried because, they don't see their creative practice, as necessarily historical. They have creative practice ongoing, and this is something that's happened in the past, and they've licensed it, and it's there is a long history of people's work being licensed and then used in ways that is perfectly in line with that license, even if they're not entirely happy with it. And so I think it's a complex issue. I hope that's useful, Sam.
Thank you, David. And a reminder to everyone, if you've got questions, do please post them in the Q&A. We have had a new one come in. What advice do you have for a UK production company with a new short film script that requires a brand new hybrid production model? So the question asked is, film uses live action, completely AI generated VFX shots, AI gen backgrounds, some for a virtual production studio, some in combination. Is there any development / production funding available for a hybrid project like this?
I can take that one. I mean, not to be too cute about it, but it kind of sounds like what they're saying is they have a short film that they want to get funding for, and there is lots of existing funding from BFI and other bodies like the Arts Council. If it's more arts focused, to create and explore with technology, specifically for projects that are exploring kind of the AI workflow side of it. I mean, there are some funds that are run by, for example, film festivals. There's a company here in the UK called Wonder Studios who have taken quite a lot of investment and I believe are exploring investments into productions. I don't think there is specifically a thing around short films that is looking to fund exactly this, but it kind of sounds like it's a short film that you're looking to fund and you happen to be using some AI technology in it. So I'd perhaps think about reframing it rather than trying to find specific funding around hybrid. How's that useful?
Thank you.
I would just add that I believe there will be more calls coming up from the various labs. So do watch out for that, because it will be, we can't always announce everything ahead of time, but I know that there are relevant ones likely to be coming up soon. So we'll be posting things like links to the website and the CoSTAR Network newsletter. The calls will be put in that network newsletter, so I would highly recommend doing that or following the various LinkedIn channels.
So we have, I just want to take attention away from the Q&A briefly to the signal stations and remind people to put posts in there of interesting developments. There's a piece here, Simeon, that I think might be relevant to the whole foresight scenario around who gets to own machine learning, with the news that a movie being planned about Sam Altman was dropped by Amazon after a OpenAI partnership was announced. I guess that speaks to that point about, you know, the challenge of big tech and the concentration of interests, and I guess why there is value for the creative industries in being able to diffuse training and ownership of models more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, that really gets to the heart of the challenge, doesn't it? Because this isn't just about who owns the actual models. This is about who owns the decision making around the kind of communications around these models. Now, you know, in the context that we are right now, I'm not going to give any personal opinions on what I think of any particular model or person, but I think it really illustrates that our kind of post-digitalization concentration of power through platform dynamics and those kind of business models are something that kind of policy is going to have to deal with, and is going to have to decide what sort of future, what sort of market, what sort of economy it wants around these, and then, you know, the kind of industry and the suppliers will respond, because this is a question of kind of regulation and of the political economy, really, to be sort of boil it down to oversimplified and yet complex challenge. But I don't want to keep coming back to like, oh, it's all about the different models and it's about the different approaches. But I think that what we're seeing is huge concentration, not just in AI and these kind of technologies, but actually in one particular approach to machine learning and generative AI, and it really is not the only one. And I'm excited about startups that are emerging in different territories, in different markets, with different cultures and different backgrounds, that are not LLM based, that will hopefully provide us more choice and more opportunity and reduce the concentration of power.
Thank you. And we've had another couple of comments for our Smash colleagues, if they are still around and on the call.
Yeah.
Excellent. So this one's about the how Smash is set up. Is there a cost for submitting a pitch via Smash, or is it the discoverers who carry the costs?
So there's a free level. Any creators can create a couple of pitches for free, and it covers IP protection. And then there's a Smash Pro level, which offers extra features and help support from our human Smash Cupid team. And on the other side, it is the discoverers, the industry decision makers, paying a monthly fee, and there's a 5% success fee.
Thank you, Christine. And the second question, you might not want to get into offering legal advice on the webinar, but are Smash able to offer any advice of what a good deal for an IP owner might look like if their pitch was to be taken up by a discoverer, or where they should seek such advice? So maybe that's easier to answer.
Yeah, definitely with a lawyer, and we do have lawyers on on the platform, so we can do introductions. But yes, always get a lawyer on board to protect yourself.
Solid advice, I think there. I think we are. Have we just had? Oh, okay. Here we go. One new question just popped up. It wasn't refreshing for me. Question on large language models versus small language models. Doesn't a small language model always rely on a large language model to exist?
Short answer, almost always, not necessarily, but I guess the quality will be dependent on it. And I think that is one of the challenges with the stuff. So even the work that the National Lab was doing, which is really exciting, using LoRa's and using small language models, that is one of the challenges. And I think that buried within the more detailed version of the slide that I showed previously was an idea that we need some sort of potentially public service AI. You know, maybe we need a national public LLM or something like that. But, you know, if you think about the volume of data and content that, you know, our national broadcasters and such like have, there is potential opportunity there. But again, this is about kind of capability, capacity, skill, regulation, policy to kind of come together to allow that to happen, which is why, yeah, we'll see that where that goes. David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I will just add. I mean, this is. I'm sure there's some old hats on the call who will disagree with me, but this is kind of early days, right, for commercialization of AI in any real sense. When we talk about AI, we're talking quite specifically about, you know, some of the research and development innovations that happened, you know, 5-10 years ago, whatever, looking at things like LLMs and diffusion models. And like you said, Simeon, there are ways to distill those things into things that can be deployed on smaller computers and pre-training and fine-tuning and all this kind of stuff, which is really interesting from a creative point of view and how you might deploy it as a company. But there's also tons of stuff happening in academia around new architectures because of all the many challenges that people have outlined around, particularly LLMs. You know, there's lots of challenges with it, and it's very early days, I would say. And so I think when we think about when we use small language models or think about different architectures, we're kind of using it as a shorthand for the understanding that there's a lot of money and a lot of vested interest now in making this industry successful, and I think some of that is going to be directed towards novel. There's a lot of it being directed towards novel research, particularly around new architectures and how we might deploy them to avoid some of the challenges that LLMs have at scale, where they actually get the capabilities that are useful.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I think, Simeon, as host, I'm looking to you. We got time for one more question before we hand back for wrap up?
Yes, I think we've got time for one more. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So this last question that came in was around transparency around data and training. So when a company states that they won't use user-generated content, or I guess inputs in the training of their AI products, is there any way for users to legitimately check if they have or not? And the question asked as understanding is that this is a black box and it's just based on trust. Do we see any examples?
I can speak to that. I would say it's an active area of research. With LLMs particularly, there are lots of ways to get them to output things that are clearly copyrighted work. Sometimes it's as simple as posting like the first sentence and letting the LLM auto-complete articles, that kind of thing. That has become more complex as time goes on, and particularly with images, it's very difficult because a lot of these companies have guardrails around you creating copyrighted work. But I think I would say it's that observability and being able to kind of roll back to training data, or at least pointing towards training data, because ultimately a lot of these models are basically compression algorithms. They're not compression algorithms, but they effectively compress large data sets into things that represent that data in a useful way. So it is quite hard to go directly back from A to B, but I think there's lots of techniques that people are developing because it from a commercial point of view, you for some use cases, you know, you can think of defense, maybe you can think of the legal world where you have to be able to prove something kind of almost undeniably. And so I think working backwards, people are working on this as active research. But right now, it's not cut and dry, I would say.
Yeah. There's some really interesting stuff happening in this space, as you say, David, and particularly I think using some of the work on kind of cryptographic approaches and kind of essentially statistically, you can very robustly say it probably has been, but you don't have a linear X followed Z kind of evidence trail that you can give. So you have to rely on the kind of strength of that kind of academic mathematical assessment rather than a kind of paper trail, if you like. So the smoking gun is a probability number rather than a kind of a process that we can document. So, but yeah, I think it's very it's very important.
Just on that very quickly, I mean, the transparency point is something that I think the government are sort of taking seriously as a sort of next step on the back of some of these concerns around AI training. And the government have said that they are going to consider ways AI developers could be more transparent around the sources used to train their models. And I think ongoing. There's a particular focus on what other territories and countries around the world are doing to kind of support those efforts around labelling, and the EU AI Act is one example that's kind of moving forward in some of these spaces, but there are multiple others. So just to say, kind of from a policy POV, that's something that's being considered as a priority going forwards as well.
Yeah, and elements embedded within content as well that would make it more traceable if it has been, or might be problematic for models if they are ingested. So there's a lot of different tactics to transparency that are kind of emerging through research. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left, and I will never let these things overrun. So I'm going to.
We do have one more question. We do have one more question.
Oh, do we?
I don't know if we have time for. I'm going to ask it to Brian. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit off piste here. It's a question for the BFI, so I'm going to recuse myself and ask you directly, Brian. There seems to be enormous opportunity with AI for analysing large volumes of media. I wonder how the BFI is thinking about these tools as an organisation, and for creators to process such as data analysis in film certification. And then I'm going to add or archives.
Yeah, so I mean, we've certainly have a active research program in the BFI National Archive. The team there is working to understand how large language models, speech-to-text models, things like that can be used for the accessibility of the archive, for metadata generation and creation to help content be more discoverable, essentially. And we've actually featured the work that team is doing as part of the Casebook, and it's well worth checking out. So I would point you in that direction for more info.
Thanks, Brian.
That was definitely worth including. Thank you, David, and thank you, Brian, for chairing our Q&A. Thank you to all of my colleagues today for your contributions. Thank you especially to our special guests. I thought they were fantastic case studies, and it was fantastic to hear about the kind of government's AI champion work as well. So I've definitely learned something. I hope everybody on the call has. Before we wrap up, I've already mentioned this a few times. You can stay connected through the CoSTAR events the newsletter and the LinkedIn, and please do complete the EDI form and the feedback form. They're two separate forms, but it's really helpful for obviously our funding and our understanding of what's useful and helpful to you. It will shape what we do next. If all of this has been too much to remember, we will be sending you a follow-up to this call via email with links and helpful info. And that's all we have time for today. Unless, David, what did you want to add?
Just wanted to say, please do fill in the feedback form, because it tells us what you want to hear next time. And otherwise, it'll just be us deciding what we talk about, which is obviously exciting, but it's best when we hear from industry what they want to hear about. And thank you very much.
On that note, goodbye, everyone.